Okay guys, this next unit is on fashion, gender, and social identity. So I'd like you to get into your Canvas page. And under Files, you scroll down, it's in alphabetical order. And this is under Discussion Notes. So go to Discussion Notes. And once you're there, scroll down to Fashion, Gender, Social Identity, PPTX. And go ahead and click on that. Open that up. And I'd like you to follow along in this particular presentation. Now, I don't normally use a lot of PowerPoints in my classes, but this one was a fun one to write. So this is based on the work of Samantha Brennan, as well as a former student of mine, a colleague of mine, Josh Brown. Josh, don't know if you'll ever see this, but shout out, bro. Samantha, never met you in person, love your work. So, fashion, gender, and social identity. So I would like to start, so scroll down with me, and that is the is-ought discussion. There are many subjects that we talk about in the psychology of sex and gender where students get upset, where they start going, that's not the way it should be, and they get so caught up in the shoulds that they lose what is going on. And therefore, because they're so politicized in their shoulds, they're not actually effectively addressing the is. And so, ought is the way we believe things, the way we believe things should be. Is the way things actually are. And so, the ought can blind us to the is. And it does so with quite startling regularity. One of the things that I get to wonder about is the expenses of things in terms of the human costs. So there's the financial costs, there's the human costs, etc. And for example, some years ago, my teenage daughter, one of my teenage daughters, came to me and said, Dad, can we please shop at this place called Justice for Girls? You know, every year you take a school shopping. I'm the fashion guru in this family. And I know it's hard to believe. I have great taste in clothes. So I showed my daughter the budget. And so we went for Justice for Girls, and then we went to a department store called Target, and then we went to a thrift store called Deseret Industries. And so I showed her the amount of money that we had, and I asked her to say, okay, so how much can you buy at each one of these places? Because here's the little pile of money that you have. So she found out at Justice she could buy, with that stack of cash, she could buy maybe one outfit. If you know, shoes, pants, shirt, etc. It was one outfit. Whereas at Target, she could buy 4 outfits. And at the thrift store, she could buy like 20 outfits. And so it was really fun watching her figure out how to put together combinations. So we ended up driving back and forth across these 3 stores a couple of times as she put together the best series of outfits that she could. And she also has great taste in clothes. The best series of outfits that she could, given the budget at hand. And it was really fun because I found myself so busy criticizing that this particular shirt is so gauzy, so transparent, that it is obviously designed to have an undershirt with it. And I was so busy caught up on what was wrong with that it ought not be this way. We ought to be double, triple dipping people, that I lost touch with what is going on. And so, likewise, there's this phenomenon that the women in my life call girl pockets, where the pockets in many pants are so thin and so narrow that they're effectively useless. I chuckle when students come into class, for example, and I see half of their devil boxes sticking out of their front pockets because their front pockets are so narrow and so thin. So it's been meaningful. So what is really going on? And now, of course, profit motive is a big part of that. If I can sell a shirt and that shirt might be more revealing than somebody would prefer if they wear the shirt alone, then therefore they're going to need to buy 2 shirts and layer up. That is part of what's going on. The other thing that's going on is layers create opportunities for dynamic color and texture. So therefore, if I'm wearing one layer in a jacket and I'm wearing another layer on a shirt and another layer on an undershirt, that gives me opportunities to use texture and color differently than if I only had to have a shirt alone, right? And so we'll get into this more in a minute, but why are women's pockets so narrow? Well, part of what is going on is that if the pockets are small and too small to be useful, therefore, then people will sell more purses, right? So more handbags, more purses, and things like that. And that is part of what's going on, except when we find that some of the companies that sell jeans with women's pockets, these tiny little pockets, they don't sell handbags, so why are they still doing it, right? Or do they have some kind of, is there a secret cabal of fashion marketers and fashion creators where this group gets together with this group and this group goes, we'll promise to make the pockets really tiny, and this group, then great, we'll make more money at handbags, but then what does the small pocket people get in return? Do they get a cut of the handbags? No, that's not what's happening. The other part of it is the way in which we tend to try to use clothing to emphasize the shape of a body or change the shape of a body or conceal the shape of a body. And if you are walking around and you've got big heavy pockets and they're full of big heavy things, it changes the line of the body. So therefore, some people like buying pants with girls' pockets because when they stuff their pants full of wallets and accessories and, there goes our woodpecker again, and phones and keys and everything else, it distorts their form. So given the opportunity to wear two identical pants, one with deep pockets and one with shallow pockets, wow, that woodpecker is busy. And by the way, because it's an endangered species, I can't do anything about it. Not that I know that I would, even though it is doing that at the side of my house. So we have this is-ought distinction, that what is going on is far more complicated than what we would like to think. So baggy jeans or jeans that are full enough cut that they can have deep pockets in them change the line of the body differently. So some of you are saying, Matt, are you saying that's right? Or you're just like, no. You're getting caught in the ought, okay? I'm talking about what is going on. With the oughtness to it, you really need to wrap your head around what is going on if you're going to make arguments for ought. And so here's a few harsh truths. We live in a world where appearance matters. And some of you saying, well, Matt, why do you look the way you do? One nice thing about being male, Caucasian, middle-aged, with a whole raft of degrees by my name, is my dependence upon appearance is growing less and less as I get older. In fact, given that I've got a lot more gray hair than I used to, given that I've got more wrinkles in my skin, that there is credibility that I am given as a scholar, as a thinker, as a person, because of my gender and age, that sometimes I've earned, and sometimes I really haven't. There are sometimes people presume I'm competent in things I don't know the first thing about. However, when I was younger, I can remember I had a clinical residency at a university called Brigham Young University. And there, they have very particular dress and grooming standards. And you notice I didn't say strict. I'll get to that in a second. They have very particular dress and grooming standards, so much so that I had to keep my hair short and I had to shave every day. And shaving is not my favorite activity, as I'm sure you can tell. And short hair, okay, I can do it. I kept my hair pretty buzzed for that year. Their house, their rules, I didn't complain. I got it, I did it. And so I also understood the history and background and how it is, for those of you who are in the counseling class, we talk about fingers and moons, how it is that there are deeper principles behind the dress and grooming standards that nobody remembers, but it's in the history if you just look at them, and those reasons don't actually apply today anymore, but bureaucrats don't care. So while I was there, what is going on is that these people have certain standards in certain ways. They want all of the employees to appear in a certain way for its own sake. Like they kind of lost touch as to the why of it. And so why this would matter in these ways. And so I got it. In that particular world, that's what it meant. There was a colleague of mine who, because this is now a public video, shall remain nameless. She is somebody I care for and respect. She was a doctoral student at a particular university, and she is somebody who understands that she lives in a world where appearance matters. She is 5'8", blonde. In casual conversation over lunch one day, she shared her measurements, the Marilyn Monroe measurements, 36, 24, 36. And very attractive, and wears her makeup very tastefully and very well. She was pretty stressed out about her dissertation defense, and she was telling me about how it is that she had strategized which faculty should be at her dissertation defense. And I kind of chuckled, because in a faculty that was over half female at her particular institution, all of the people who were on her committee that she has to defend her dissertation to. So a dissertation defense is when you write this big hairy research document. It's an original piece of research that you design as a scholar, and then when you're done, you present it, this big book that you have written, and you present it to your faculty, and they decide whether or not it's good enough for you to be called doctor. And if it's not, you go back to the drawing board and try again, and it can delay your graduation by 2-3 years. So the dissertation defense is a big deal, and she was pretty stressed out and telling me about what it is that each one of the men on her committee brought to the table in terms of their scholarship background or attitudes and attributes. And I just kind of shared with her, I said, "Hun, I'm intrigued that these are all men." And she just looked at me and very brusquely says, "Look, I know what I'm doing." And I went, "Oh, okay, I presume you do." So this particular colleague, her sense of fashion is impeccable. Like, it kind of transcends fashion and into style, and we might have a chance to talk about that later in this unit. But I show up to her defense too to give my colleague moral support. She's always been kind to me, always very supportive of me. The least I could do is show up for her. And I'm the only other person in the room besides her committee. And I was kind of surprised, because she's a rather popular person with her fellow students. And so as I show up and I sit down, I finally get to see a draft of her dissertation. She had kept telling me for a few weeks, "Oh, I'll get it to you, I'll get it to you. I want it to be good enough, I want it to be." And so I get the draft, and it was more like a pamphlet. Like, usually when I get dissertation drafts, they're, documents that are anywhere from 250 pages to 500 pages long. And this was thin. It was not even 40 pages, including frontis matter and references. More like a pamphlet than a dissertation. And so I was looking, and I started to feel panic for this person who matters to me, because this isn't going to pass muster. So as I'm flipping through, her introduction was well written, but it was too short. There were a lot of issues within that particular area that she wasn't covering, that she didn't even mention. As I look at her hypotheses were as sophisticated as a kindergartner writing on construction paper with a crayon. Her analyses were so basic of an undergraduate student in their first exam in their statistics class could probably write just as good an analysis plan, right? And her results, she was claiming far beyond the data. That she was claiming about her research shows that this causes this, when it wasn't a causative study. It was a correlative study. And even then, there were so many flaws in her design that she couldn't even justify a correlation. So I'm sitting here reading through this, and my heart's just sinking into my guts, going, "Oh no," because I know what she's got going on in life. She really can't afford to do 2 more years of grad school. Oh. And so then she walks in the room, and she was wearing 4-inch heels, bright red, like a deep little candy apple, stockings with the seam up the back, a skirt that went down between her hips and her knees, so very tight, particular pencil skirt, but shorter, and then her a red jacket, a black blouse, a gold chain, and her jacket was open and very, very figure cut. And then her blouse was, I don't know if you guys can see it, but unbuttoned down to below her sternum. And her earrings, all of her accessories match. I mean, her outfit was on point. It looked like something, though, that somebody would wear to a date where they were trying to impress their date in terms of beauty and physical attraction. So she's walking in, I'm going, that's a very strange choice. I don't, if I were advising her, I mean, everything works. It looked, the outfit was gorgeous, but I don't know that that's what I would advise somebody to wear to a dissertation defense. She could use the same colors, a similar style, but perhaps be a little more stereotypified covered, if that makes any sense, relative to that particular context. And so she begins and she starts presenting her dissertation, and I'm watching these men who are critical thinkers. Some of them are even jerks. Like they're the kind of person who will stand up in the middle of a dissertation and go, "This is bullshit!" You know, they're those kind of people. And they're enraptured watching my friend present her dissertation. And I'm intrigued. I'm going, you guys aren't seeing that this is crayon on construction paper? That this is, like, undergraduates often do better work than this? And I'm keeping this to myself. I don't want to submarine or sabotage her dissertation defense. And so rather than the meeting usually lasts about an hour, hers lasted about 20 minutes total, where she presented for 10 minutes and rather than the customary 20 to 30, and then they excuse her from the room where they can deliberate without they deliberate behind your back because they don't want your presence to modify how it is they're speaking about you behind your back, and they believe it helps objectivity. I have a whole rant about that. I'll save for another day. And all of these scholars, you know, men ranging in age from their late 30s all the way up into their 60s, were just gushing about what a great dissertation it was. And I'm sitting there shocked because I get lost in the ought. And so I back into the is. What is going on? My friend is very physically attractive. Not only is she physically attractive, but she uses her fashion to emphasize her attractiveness in certain ways. And so therefore, knowing that, she came in and looked a particular way, where she looked professionally yet sexually accessible at the same time. And that very much changes the mind and feelings of the people around her. And so I watched that in stunned silence. They only deliberated about her dissertation. Well, we all know she's going to pass. I mean, she's worked hard. She's done her due. And then they talked about golf for the next 8 minutes and then went and got her. And congratulations, Dr. So-and-so. And there was celebration and she was crying and she was so relieved. And afterwards, I met her in the hallway and I said, "You little beauty." And she goes, "What?" And I said, "You saw my dissertation." And she goes, "Yeah." And I said, "What if I'd shown up to my defense dressed as you were? Would that have worked for me the way it worked for you?" And she laughed and she said, "No." She said, "I spent as much time picking my outfit as I did printing out this dissertation and getting the last draft formatted." Appearance matters in this culture. And so you may hate that, you may quail against it, you may be somebody who has experienced appearance working for you in some ways and against you in other ways, and you may dislike that. Go ahead and dislike it. That's not the world we live in. So, on the one hand, dressing the way I do, when I dress very casually, often very deliberately, because I've noticed that there is a demonstrable effect when I pull my hair back, trim my beard, and I show up to class in a suit and tie, briefcase. What is intriguing to me is students are far more intimidated by that when I show up versus when I show up in jogging pants, flip-flops, these t-shirts, and my hair akimbo. I deliberately do this because it has a different effect, that students are less intimidated by a disheveled professor than they are by a professor who is very sharply on point in terms of fashion. So we live in a world where appearing certain ways allows us access or gives us access to certain tangible benefits, and there are many intangible ones as well. That this friend of mine who defended her dissertation often receives tangible and intangible benefits. And she is aware of them, and one of the reasons why we're friends is she's very grateful for them and deliberately attempts not to capitalize on them. when she is at a club, for example, and a bartender is trying to give her free drinks just because she's attractive, she insists on paying for her own drinks while still being lovely and gracious and borderline flirtatious with the bartender. So, what are the benefits that you receive because of the way you look? And so there are many tangible benefits and intangible benefits I get. And somebody's saying, well, Matt, I don't find you attractive. No, that's the point. You don't need to. That there are still tangible and intangible benefits I get by being big and hairy and dressing the way I do. There are also many things I don't get. Like I've noticed nobody buys me free drinks. And that's fine, right? That's not a benefit that I get because of the way I appear. And so what I do get is the freedom to walk across a dark parking lot by myself late at night knowing nobody's going to mess with me, right? That is a very intangible benefit that I get because of the way I appear. So others of you appear differently, and it can be quite a challenge for us who prefer, or for those of you who prefer that you look differently, to really tune into the tangible and intangible benefits you get because of the way you do appear. Another friend of mine, she helped me coin a phrase, taupe-colored people. So taupe, if you know, is believed to be soothing. It's, how would you describe taupe? It's like add tan and white together to make both more bland. That's taupe. And she believes herself to be a taupe-colored person. She has spent her entire life just fading in the background. Nobody sees her. Nobody pays attention to her. Like one day in the bus, somebody sat on her. Like that she is effectively invisible. Well, when you get to meet her personally, there are reasons why she needs to stay invisible because she's delightful and she'd get more attention than she's comfortable with if she let that shine. And so, at the same time though, her invisibility, I envy at times. I've never had the privilege of being invisible. I've never been invisible, right? And so therefore that is a tangible benefit she gets, and she dresses in ways that magnify her invisibility. And so therefore her appearance is magnified in a way where she is never called attention to and never calls attention to herself. It's pretty cool. Again, everything has its disadvantages as well, but I'd like to challenge you to come and struggle with and try to begin to identify the advantages and the intangibles that you get, intangibles you get for appearing the way you do. So, something I would like us to do is again, go back to our fourth dimensional thinking. Endeavor to feel informed by research without feeling implicated by it. Okay? That when we read through this research, I've noticed that my students tend to start to feel self-conscious, certain students start to feel self-conscious in certain ways, as though Brennan or Brown or these other scholars are talking about them personally. No, they're not. Try to look at this broadly. You can see your place within these dynamics without trying to make this about you personally. Try to see the context of what's going on. So, why discuss fashion at all? So, scroll down to the next slide. Gentleman in a leather jacket and black pants. There seems to be a yellow bus behind him. So, fashion is material culture. Our personal values are made manifest in our material goods. We put our money into what matters to us. Hence, our appearance in our society is a way of providing a bridge to the self that we are or would like to portray ourselves to be. Okay? And so I would like to rap about that distinction for a minute. No, let me do that in a minute. Let me back up first. My personal values are reflected in material goods. Something that might be meaningful, and some of you probably already do this, is every day write down what you spend money on. So my friend Kira gave me one of these books years ago, and it just sits here in my wallet. And you can't see it from there, but it's what I'm spending money on and how much. Okay, and so I can keep track of what I'm spending on all the time. And of course, since I've done this, I've not gone negative in my spending money. So this doesn't count bill money, right? That goes into a separate account. It's automatically transferred out of a separate account. This is what's called discretionary funds, meaning that once bills are paid, the money I have left over. Somebody's saying, there is such thing as that? Yeah, not for everybody, unfortunately. For me, I happen to have some. I'm privileged and very grateful that I do. And so it's really fun for me thinking that I value certain things, that I stand for certain things, I have these moral values in certain ways, and look how cool I am, I tell myself, because of my moral values. And then I go back through and I look at what I actually spend money on, and wow, fast food and video games. I guess that's what I really value. So I'm joking and oversimplifying, but I'm just trying to give you guys a notion of what I mean, right? That which we value is where our money goes. And some people are saying, well, I only have enough money to survive. Great, your survival matters to you. I appreciate that it does. My survival matters to me. If you were here, your survival would matter to me as well. And so we put our money into what matters to us. And some of us have the luxuries to varying degrees of showing who we are advertently or inadvertently through this expenditure. So, as you guys can tell, I'm rather monochromatic when I teach. But there are other colors that I also wear. If you were to look at my wardrobe, and it's Papa's sharp wardrobe, where I've got my jackets, my slacks, my various shirts, that you find that the colors that I tend to emphasize, yes, black is heavily represented, but so is a deep saturated reds. Ruby reds, crimsons, etc., well represented. Blues are well represented. Purples are well represented. Occasional like saturated greens, emerald greens, etc. And red it goes black, red, and then these other colors in even proportion. And I don't particularly care for the color red, but my sweetheart does. And therefore, I will wear a black attire or something black with red accents or red contrasts because I value her attention, and I've noticed that when I tend to wear black and then red, she pinches my butt and tells me how hot I look, right? So I'm spending this money on this particular way because I value her attention, and therefore that wearing of black and red is a manifestation of my affection for her. If she weren't in my life, it would probably be other colors paired with black. I wonder if she knows this. I bet you she's put it together. So the way we appear, like even my cars, for those of you that have seen the vehicles that I drive, they're often black, and they often have red accents on them that I put on. Racing stripes and things like that, because it's my way of expressing valuing to her. She also gets to drive these cars, and it's usually my car that we take on a date, etc. So what we spend money on reflects our values. So my clothing is black and red, or black and one of these other colors, because of the attention that I value in certain ways. So the other thing, though, is we can also use fashion as a mediator between our most intimate selves and the outside world, that we can use the clothing that we wear to mediate that. So I know that in this format you guys can't necessarily read these t-shirts. I have 72 of them. And every year for Christmas, and some of you have heard this story before, let me back up. The tradition of me getting t-shirts every year for Christmas originates in a conversation I had with one of my younger sisters. Now, as you know, I have a lot of sisters. In the middle of 7, I have 5 sisters. And one of my younger sisters would draw my name for Christmas shortly after she got married, but she was a starving student with her husband who was a starving student, and she felt bad that they didn't have money to buy me a present. None of us have money to buy presents for all of our siblings. We've just got too many of them. And so I told her that if I gave her some of these black 3 extra large, extra tall t-shirts, would she put sayings on them for me? And she agreed to do so. So the older shirts, you can actually tell they're hand painted. Like this is one of the older ones, and it's hand painted very precisely. So I bought a case, because I'm older than her, I was farther along, I was graduated, I was a professor, and so I bought her a whole case of these 3 extra large blank t-shirts. And then every year for Christmas, my father has arranged, and it's like a sleight of hand trick that he used to do, of Julie would always manage to draw my name. And it was really fun. It's a lovely tradition. And then during our big Christmas party every year when we're exchanging gifts, part of it is Matt does the unveiling of the shirts. And so I pull every shirt out and we read them together and laugh. Well, where did the sayings come from? Well, the sayings come from me, they come from you. Sometimes they're stolen off of t-shirts that don't come in my size. I've got a few of those where I love that t-shirt, I love that saying, but it doesn't come in 3 extra large, extra tall, so we'll just pirate it. But most of them come in conversation. Some of you saw us wearing hoodies the other day that tacos taste better than hate. That's one of the t-shirt designs we have. And that originated in class one day when I was talking about how it is that I was raised in a particular way where emotional expressions were often repressed, like loud laughter was repressed, and crying was repressed, and anger was repressed. And so how it is that as a child I learned to eat my feelings, and then I just offered it in an offhand way, because after all, tacos taste better than hate, right? And several of the students laughed. Well, next thing you know, one of the students designed a t-shirt around that, tacos taste better than hate, with this lovely little smiley, waving taco. And now it's a shirt in my collection. Right? That's the ways in which this unfolds. So there are things about me that are actually very intimate. Some of these sayings, some of these statements are. And therefore, it is a way for me to express some of who I really am into the world through these sayings on these t-shirts. At the same time, though, we can also use what we wear to conceal who we are. And so I'm thinking of a friend of mine who very carefully and very deliberately wears these particular very sharp suits to cover over the fact that he feels deeply insecure. It's called imposter syndrome. At work, he does not feel up to or prepared for the tasks that he is given. Now, between me and you, he's extraordinarily good at them. He's deserved every raise and every promotion he's gotten, but he has never felt up to any of the tasks. In fact, he jokes with me on the DL about, here it is, we're in our late 40s, about when it is we're going to stumble into adulthood because he doesn't feel like an adult yet. And so it's neat that for him, he uses those suits almost as armor to mediate and give him an appearance of security, an appearance of competence, because inside he feels so incompetent at what he's doing. And so we can also use that. Now, another reason psychologically why we talk about fashion is because our clothing is in direct contact with us. And so it is, in a manner of speaking, always already touching us. Think of what little always already touches you throughout your day. And it's just your clothes. Like when you're driving your car, yeah, you're in contact with your car, but probably only for a short period of time. Then the chair you're sitting in class, or hugging a friend, that all of those things are far more transient and come and go out of your life than the clothing that you wear. So therefore, psychologically speaking, we get to think about the clothing that we wear and how comfortable it is. For example, I don't like belts. I'm a portly fellow. Belts often aren't built with us big guys in mind. At the same time, though, there are ways of wearing belt-like things that don't look like the belts that I was raised with that do keep my pants up and yet look differently. So we get to think about that. Now, there is a philosopher that we talk about from time to time in psychology, especially in perception psychology and in gender psychology, named Maurice Merleau-Ponty. And I'm sorry, I don't speak French, so I'm probably butchering his name. But he talks about the body is the first social object. So the body is that which makes us social and the first part of us that others encounter in social settings. When you walk into a room, you're not seeing everybody's personality, you're not seeing their IQs, you're not seeing all of these other things about them. What you're seeing is their bodies, right? You just see the body. It is the first social object. Likewise, what they see first of you is your body. He goes on to talk about how, in a manner of speaking, the body is the visible outer limit of the self. Now, we can contrast that with other thinkers who have informed psychology, like Levinas, Gadamer, Taylor, etc. But for now, let's just go with it, that the body is this visible outer limit, meaning that it's almost like an event horizon, for those of you that have studied physics. It's beyond this point, relationally speaking, beyond this exterior cover of me, is where you get into more and more intimate details of myself, where you are kind of brought into my internal world. And so the body is, on the one hand, the outer limit of the self. It is the place where the self ends and the world begins, is this skin and covering over the skin called clothing. At the same time, though, it's a lovely paradox, because the body is the outer limit of myself, and at the same time, the point at which we connect. So, therefore, if you are seeing me, that is the point at which we are connecting. Your eyes are touching, metaphorically speaking, my body, and my eyes are, metaphorically speaking, touching your body. That the body is, on the one hand, very intimate and private. My skin is the outer boundaries of myself. And yet, at the same time, it's also the boundary where we connect. And so usually it's visual, but for friends, family, and lovers, we connect through touch. Those event horizons come together. And then there's lovely things we could start writing about, that those who love one another, engaging in dance and intercourse, etc., become as one flesh, that their event horizons collapse over one another, and for a period of time they are one entity. In a G-rated way, we can kind of do that where the event horizons don't necessarily cross into one another, where in deep dialogue we transcend the outer limits, these fleshy outer limits, or these clothed outer limits of the self, and instead can begin to experience the inner lives of other people. Some of you have had that experience where you've been lost in conversations with others, where you are sharing that experience so deeply that your sense of self melts away because you're lost in the activity. Some of you who are dancers, you've had a more intimate version of that same experience, where the movement with the person you're dancing with becomes simultaneous to the point where you don't even think about the steps anymore. You're moving in motion together. Likewise, for those of you who are sexually active with lovers, where there's that connection and that union, so much so that the sense of self and other begins to melt away. So the body is, on the one hand, a very private experience, a very intimate experience, and yet at the same time is a shared experience. It's also shared in the sense that all of us have bodies. So therefore, even if your body is different from mine, that we still share the experience of embodiment in common. And so the body is, on the one hand, a very private event and a very public event in a very fourth dimensional way, according to Merleau-Ponty. He didn't use the term fourth dimensional, that's idiosyncratically mine. But it is this simultaneity of private and public at the same time. So our body and the clothing that we wear mediates the relationship between self, other, and environment. Between self and other, in the sense that how I appear, how I look, how I comport myself, how I behave, all of that is a part of the experience other people are having of me and with me. And likewise, it mediates my relationship with the environment, that it's my clothing that offers comfort in extreme environments. It offers discomfort in extreme environments, so it mediates my relationship between my environments. So you say, Matt, what do you mean? Well, if it's cold, we often put on jackets. Like, it's surprisingly cold in this room and my feet are cold. Usually my house is quite warm, and so I'm wearing flip-flops. My poor feet are cold. And so now do I need to go put on shoes, because that might then protect my feet from the cold. Likewise, if I were wearing a jacket, for example. Hello, boo. Come and say hi. Just come and say hi. Oh, Mindy's jealous. And so, come here, doggy dog. Good boy. And so we wear jackets and sweaters, for example, in extreme conditions. And so our clothing, our fashion is a mediated relationship there. But at the same time, though, there are times when the weather is extreme, like it's hot, and because of social convention, we don't strip down. So I can remember I was presenting at a conference in Taiwan a little while ago, and there was a certain expectation of attire at that conference, and so I put together some pretty bomb-ass looking outfits and looked super sharp, got a lot of compliments for my clothing. But I'm walking around Taiwan in the summer. It was 102 degrees and 110% humidity, and there I am in slacks and a jacket and shirt and just sweating, right? So therefore, it mediates us uncomfortably in extreme environments, where the mediated relationship is now I'm more hot and more sweaty than I would be if I could just choose my own attire. So you better believe, the second the conference day was over, it was back to the Airbnb, shorts on, t-shirt on, suit off, etc. So scroll down with me to the next slide, if you would. The body is a symbol. So there are cultural symbolisms that come with the body. And they are they are both mirrors of culture of origin, psychologically speaking, as well as perpetuators of that same culture. I find that very interesting. And I can think of many examples. For example, usually I'm dressed in either jeans and a t-shirt or shorts and a t-shirt, and my shorts are big and baggy, and I like, when I'm dressing for comfort, big baggy clothes. And so here in this neighborhood, I'm very fortunate to live in predominantly a blue-collar neighborhood. Like, my neighbor on this side is a machinist for an essential oil company. The neighbor over here is a subcontractor and framer, and people behind us work at Kennecott Mines, and the people over there work, you know what I mean, a very blue-collar neighborhood. And for many years, because of my clothing, I seem to represent also a blue-collar culture. So therefore, many of my neighbors, in, over the fence, neighborhood barbecues, etc., would ask me about what's going on at UVU, and I would tell them, and they would demonstrate their assumption that I work at maintenance or something like that at UVU, which, if I knew how to do that, I'd be happy to do. And some of them felt betrayed years later when they learned that I was a university professor, because they have a certain cultural idea about how universities should appear. The balding comb over, the little round glasses, the tweed jacket, things like that. That's the culture of university professor appearing to them. And so therefore, by me being in jeans and a t-shirt or shorts and a t-shirt, I look more like them. So therefore, they assumed I was part of blue-collar culture. And it's a fair assumption. And that's the way it works. So one of the things we get to wonder about is the way in which this is gendered, because as you guys know, this is a psychology of sex and gender class. When we look across cultures here in the United States, Canada, Mexico, when we go over, across the water, Japan, China, Thailand, we go the other way, France, Britain, Switzerland, Sweden, we begin to see that when it comes to dressing traditionally, women are more likely to dress per their cultural traditions than men are. And this becomes acutely obvious in certain cultures where attire is strongly culturally controlled and culturally regulated, like the United States and, say, Saudi Arabia. And some of you are saying, wait, those couldn't be two more different cultures. Yes, they couldn't be in some ways, and the way in which fashion is tightly controlled is also a part of what's going on here. And I'm making an extreme case for the sake of argument. I'm being a little bit of a polemic right now. So if we were to go to Saudi Arabia, we would find that the women are often in a particular attire where much of or all of their bodies are covered much or all of the time, especially in public. And there are certain colors that are culturally permissible and certain colors that aren't. And therefore, there is a strong control. But when we look at the varieties of dress in men, they are less constrained than the varieties of dress culturally allowed for women. And this is not universally typical, but pretty typical broadly. Whereas same thing here in the United States, where there are certain attires that work and you don't get culturally punished for, and certain forms of dress that you do get culturally for, and other forms that you don't get punished for. And one of the reasons why this is gendered is I'm thinking of my female colleagues, those who identify as female. If they were to dress how I do at work, because even at the university I'm often attired the way I am right now, there is more blowback and there is more cultural tension and pressure for them to look a certain way than there is for me by far. And somebody say, well, Matt, you're a middle-aged, tenured professor, like, how? No, even as pre-tenured faculty. That as pre-tenured faculty, this is how I dressed, right? Years ago, I'm in the habit of dressing this way after we did some social experiments. Hopefully we'll get to that story. some of my students actually did social experiments with me and on me about draper dressing in certain ways, and the results were quite fun. But there are different consequences for women dressing certain ways in our society, and there are